Welcome to what I wish could be a 5-hour episode of Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and I am so pumped today to be joined by the Bill Simon.
You're very kind.
Thank you for being here,
Thank
Bill.
you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bill Simon is the Group Vice President Sales North America for McCormick's. He leads the U.S. and Canadian internal and external sales teams responsible for driving profitable growth across retail, club, mass, e-commerce, dollar, and drug channels. Bill also leads McCormick's customer strategic planning, category management, revenue management, sales planning, and sales technology activities for the McCormick, Frank's, French's, Cholula, Stubbs, Zatarain's, Lowry's, Old Bay, Thai Kitchen, and Kitchen Basics brands. Bill began his career with McCormick in 2014 and most recently served as Vice President of Sales, U.S. Consumer Products. Prior to McCormick, Bill held a variety of sales, R&D, revenue management, and marketing positions during a 20-year career with H.J. Heinz. During that time, he was primarily focused on building sales strategies and go-to-market models for food service and retail sales teams. There, he led the transformation of both the Heinz Ketchup and or Ida businesses through comprehensive pricing, promotion, and go-to-market strategies. Bill holds a Bachelor of Science degree in marketing and a Master of Business Administration in Marketing and Finance from Pennsylvania State University. He currently sits on the board of the St. Joseph's Food Marketing Program as well as the University Scholars Program at Penn State. Wow.
Yeah.
Good stuff there.
It sounds impressive.
It is impressive. And what this bio tells us is that you have a lot of credibility. And I know firsthand that you're a great businessman and also far and away one of the best leaders I've ever worked with.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you.
So I am very excited to have you here today and to share all of your gifts and wisdom with us.
I look forward to it. So thanks again for having me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
All right. So bring this bio to life.
Yeah.
Take me on a deep dive here of your leadership journey. If you
So
would.
30 years in a nutshell?
Yeah.
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 What I would say is, I was very blessed coming out of grad school. So I started actually at ADP in sales, and I decided that I didn't want to be in sales. So I went back to Penn State for my MBA in finance and marketing. And lo and behold, I ended up in sales for the last 27 years. So,
I was going to say.
yeah, no, I started in so that journey started actually as an unpaid intern at Heinz. So there was a hiring freeze. Yeah, so that came with obviously a bit of humble pie and learned a ton about myself and started that journey for about 2 years in marketing. And then I was asked to start up a new department called trade marketing. And that started me on my journey of internal sales, where I spent the bulk of my time at Heinz, close to 15 years of the 20 in internal sales, which for most folks, they're like, what the heck is that? And basically, it's anything that enables sales success, anything that leaves the building, insights, analytics, pricing, ultimately putting the sales team in a position to be successful. That was what my team was ultimately accountable for.
Kind of like the behind the scenes that makes the sales.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yeah, and ultimately shepherding and balancing the company agenda with the customer agenda, because those two are sometimes in conflict and sometimes they're in sync. So that was a tremendous learning across those 15 years. And you would say, hey, how did you last 15 years? Well, it was subsequent expansion of the role and ultimately leading to North American accountability across food service, which is basically restaurants, and the consumer space, which was grocery stores.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that was a really cool journey. And then, be careful what you wish for a moment. Was, hey, I really want to be a general manager. That was what I was classically trained to do. And I went to the CEO at the time, and he said, you know what, we believe that you can actually do that. But before you do that, we're going to test you. And it was one of the best, at the time, it wasn't my reaction, but it was one of the best learning experiences I ever had. And I was blessed with a great team. And I was thrust into an R&D capacity with no technical skill.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And basically I was put in charge of what they called CCI, which was basically cost out and efficiency. So anything that the consumer wasn't willing to pay for, we were charged with optimizing products, but not denigrating quality, which is a really delicate balance, or working in the plants to minimize waste, things of that nature. And the team at the time was remarkably talented, but they were also stuck on a number that had been fairly predictive, and we were asked to have a meaningful change in trajectory. And so here comes the sales guy into a technical community.
I love that.
Yeah, it was, talk about being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? And understanding where you had leverage, understanding where you had value, maybe better said, where you could apply principles that you learned in sales and commercial to a technical community, but also finding out, who was ultimately with you to have a seismic shift in performance. And then ultimately, what was the advocacy and change management necessary to drive that on their behalf.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of listening, a lot of learning, right, particularly on the front end. And I was really proud. I mean, that first year we came close to doubling it. We didn't double it completely. Yeah. So, and that's a testament to the folks on the ground and the folks that did that, and ultimately figuring out ways to enable their success. And then, you know me from a brief stint in my roadmap, right? So the company was acquired, which was a remarkable learning. It was, personally and professionally, a really interesting window for me.
Yeah.
And I ended up taking a role for family and actually for change management too with Mylan Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
And I have no regrets on that. It was an 11-month journey. That's where I obviously met you, and I met some great people along the way. And I actually still apply some learnings from Mylan, despite the fact that that was a very short stint. It wasn't my cup of tea, but it was just a tremendous learning experience in a great company. And I was in charge of commercial performance and insight, so I was thrust into A, new industry, B, new form team, new architecture. Didn't really have knew everything, right? And not realizing, frankly, where the change management curve was where I entered. Boss was great, full advocacy. I felt tremendous support from, frankly, my functional partners, you, finance, others. But it clearly was a stretch that was beyond where I thought I could have elongated impact. I felt like I had short-term impact, but I didn't feel like I was going to have elongated impact. Opportunity at McCormick came up to run sales, which I had never run the full sales function. I had run portions of sales. And that was just a dream job for me. And it was working for a gentleman that I knew for 15 years who I knew had a really strong read on the culture, really strong read on me personally, where, my pros and cons were and where I could add value and where I would have to learn, and I would need some stretch and some rope and some support. And he put me in that position. It's been a remarkable ride. We've had tremendous performance relative to peer group, relative to, frankly, my expectations. And just like I think anyone that sits at this table with you, it's more about the people that delivered and their story and what we've been able to watch and see and watching people achieve what they didn't think was possible. Tremendous amounts of change, particularly in the first 3 to 4 years, which we can certainly talk about. And I'm still, I'm in that role now almost 8 years, and that's the longest I've been. I mean, it certainly has expanded as we've acquired and built the business, but the fact that I'm still invigorated, I still see tremendous opportunity, is a testament not only to McCormick, but it's also a testament to where I see the business going and where I think we can take the organization to.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So hopefully that wasn't too long.
No, it's such a good journey. And like I said, it's detailed in the bio, but I wanted you to bring it to life, and you added a lot of great pieces and parts that I think are important to understand the full picture of who Bill is, and especially in terms of your background.
The professional Bill. We're gonna stick with professional Bill, right? Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. We don't want to flirt with that too much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think, and you're right. I had the great fortune of getting to work with you, and so what's helpful to me and what has impacted and prepared some of the questions that I have for you today is the fact that I have gotten to see you in action. And it allows us to, go a little bit deeper, I think, hopefully. But I am curious to hear how you would describe your leadership style.
Yeah, you were kind enough to send some questions in advance, and this one I think is really tough because I view it more as principles in terms of what makes an effective leader versus style. Because I think stylistically, I don't necessarily know if I would have anyone mimic it because I think you really have to find your true north and your true self. And what I've found is where advocacy is strongest is the agility to accept people for who they are and leverage the variability that exists both personally and professionally, and being sensitive and empathetic to that is where success intersects. Now, in fairness, I still feel like I'm perfecting that craft. But some principles that have guided me, and I'm sure we may retrace some of these steps, and I've used this with my daughters. So I have two daughters, 22 and 19. So one's starting her professional journey and one's trying to figure it out. But one mantra that I used to use, frankly, commuting from Pittsburgh to Milan and now commuting to Baltimore for McCormick, is work hard to be great. And it's a personal philosophy. It was ingrained in me early from my dad. And it was all about effort can outstrip talent, and effort can outstrip natural ability. And I see it every day. And I don't think you ever achieve your fullest potential until that is ultimately realized. And that doesn't mean nights, weekends, sacrificing family, faith, or anything else that's right.
Yes.
So striking the balance that's right for you. But there are sacrifices along the way that we've all had to make, choices that we've had to make, and it has to intersect productively with those forces personally. But that one's guided me quite a bit. I never wanted to lose based on effort. If I was going to lose, it was because I was, I went down a path and I learned something, or I took something away from it. I think the other tenets for me would be accessibility and humility.
Yes.
And then also another one that rhymes would be agility. And when I look at those forces, I want folks to be comfortable approaching me with both ideas and issues. I have a phrase where you can't fix what you don't know, can't address what you don't know. I don't care what it is. And the whole notion of accessibility and not taking yourself too seriously, such that you can have these type of discussions across the desk with someone very junior to the most senior folks, I think is really critical to get the best out of folks, to know that they're heard, to know that they're valued. All the things about rewards, recognition, certainly you can see all that well documented, but I think the intrinsic value that leaders create is tapping into that point of differentiation successfully. And sometimes that motivation is personal. Like, hey, I need more flexibility. You know what? We're going to do that for you, and here's where you go. Or I need a stretch assignment, and here's how I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, well, let's map that out. And just being flexible such that you can afford folks to achieve their greatest potential. And then the last one that I look for, I mean, it's not the only thing I look for, but I really do believe that a differentiating factor is curiosity.
Me too.
You do? Okay, yeah. We've never talked about this, so
I know.
It all gets back to, and I've used this with others. Once you stop learning, you're in a desperate need for a change. Like if McCormick had not provided these challenges for me, all of them productive, but some of them pretty darn tough. I would start to wither, and I would start to need to fill that gap. And I see it repeatedly. Like high performers want to learn, want to stretch, want to grow. And with that, the fundamental predictor of that is curiosity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The willingness to challenge your conventional thinking, or, really, frankly, challenging whether you were right or wrong as a leader, or whether your recommendation was, you know what, that wasn't the best path. And to decipher that on the interview process, or to decipher that across the desk, is pretty intriguing, right? Because a lot of folks that I work,
how do you do that?
well, it's interesting because I try to, if it's an interview, I try to deduce whether the individual has made a mistake, because I really don't believe you've truly tapped curiosity to the fullest extent unless you've made a mistake. Like I can certainly recount many personally or professionally. We don't have to go into all of them, but and those are learning moments that are really impactful. They're not necessarily the most they're not the fondest sometimes, as long as they're not crisis,
right.
right?
But usually those tough moments are what ends up making you better in the long run, or that you take something from it, you take a learning experience from that.
I do. I mean, I sometimes they come in the form of a challenge where it's like, okay, this is going to test me. It's going to test my capacity. It's going to test me on multiple vectors. It's going to challenge how I've approached things in the past, because the problem is so vastly different, or it's multidimensional. I haven't seen things clash together like this.
Yes.
So I know I'm talking in circles, but at the end end of the day, what I look for, you can get that. I interview a lot of folks that are just wicked smart, analytically grounded folks. I interview a lot of folks that are faced with and ultimately charged with navigating the customer productively. So my team is comprised of probably, call it 50, 60 individuals that are inside sales, what I used to do.
Yes.
And the rest are outside customer facing, right?
So cool. So you have both.
So I have both.
Which are sometimes different personalities.
100%. And frankly, what my vision, or I should say what my definition of what was successful has moderated dramatically over the last 8, 9 years. And we can certainly talk about that. So you can absolutely test curiosity based on the ability to accept failure and then reapply. You can absolutely test curiosity based on problem identification and then ultimately solution mapping, right? Like, hey, talk to me about the solutions. And if it's very linear, it probably hasn't hit the degree that you would probably want versus degrees of optionality that are provided to you as a leader and or to the individual. There are a few tactics that I use, but those are some.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I remember there is so much literature, and I know you've been a part of this too, where you're in organizations and you're trying to determine high potential employees. And every company defines it differently, and there's all kinds of think tanks out there that try to model what is a high potential employee. But there was one model that I remember coming across that I thought was probably the simplest but a great predictor, and that was learning agility.
Yeah.
Does the person have learning agility?
Yeah.
Which,
and I think agility,
to me, learning agility and curiosity, kind of go hand in hand. But I thought, if I think back to people who I would at least, and others have deemed high potential, they all did have that common thread.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you 100%, and it comes in various forms too, right? It doesn't have there's no one. I mean, that's probably an overused cliche, but there's no one footprint and or model where that manifests itself.
Right.
And I've learned that a lot over the course of time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I did a deep dive on your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, no.
And I was really intrigued because
I feel like I need to update that.
No. It's good. It's good.
Okay.
But I looked at recommendations that people wrote for you,
and
I loved them.
Yeah. I haven't looked at that in ages.
Oh, it's so good because what I loved about it is that a lot of times recommendations can be very generic and, like, well, Bill's a great guy, a very thought-provoking leader. They use all the corporate jargon and all that. Yeah. But these people know you. They know how.
You're going to jog some memories if you cite some specifics.
So I'm going to call out one in particular. So a gentleman, Marty, wrote, quote, Bill has tremendous brights and strong interpersonals to match. He is the total package.
Oh, very kind.
And I loved that because I can validate that firsthand. I think one of the things that stands out and differentiates you in my mind is you have really high IQ, but you also have really high EQ, and you don't always see that in balance with someone. And I just like to hear your take on, is that a learned thing? Is that your default wiring, and how you hold that in balance?
Yeah, so, you and I talked before this started that I'm not necessarily convinced the IQ portion is as high as what Marty, and I worked with Marty for over probably a quarter century, so I know him really well.
Marty knows and I know, so we
say. Okay, so you say
we are the authority on Bill.
Therefore, it's the truth.
Yeah.
I would say my default mechanism has always, particularly as a leader. So I think there's an important delineation here, and we can certainly talk about this too further, is the leap from individual contributor to leader, right?
Yes.
And so I think IQ and curiosity and analytical rigor and financial acumen and the things that are classically trained in an MBA program, or frankly in many great companies that afford you the opportunity to garner those competencies and skills, is a delineating factor in building out your foundation of the house, right? And so I think the reason I put work hard to be great, I never felt like I was the IQ guy. I felt like I was sufficient. I didn't feel like I was, I've been around just brilliant people even to this day that just blow me away, awesome. and I've had the pleasure of learning from them even, as of, yesterday when we're talking about some strategy work. But so I felt like I was sufficient. And then I always felt like I had to, work harder to try to figure it out, So I think the IQ is so important to understanding problems, to defining solutions, presenting case studies, storytelling, things of that nature, really, really critical and so pronounced early.
Yes.
Right. In addition to, the ability to convey message, right? Yeah, and
Yes.
particularly early in your career, because there's so many really bright minds that struggle with that communication and that influence mechanism.
Mhm.
The EQ is my natural default. What's interesting is at work, and I think my wife would agree with this. At work, I'm heavy EQ. That comes out in every test that I've ever taken.
Yeah.
Like I'm very driven. I'm very results oriented. And I'm heavy EQ, and I want to have fun, and
Yeah.
I want high energy. I want positive energy.
Yeah.
And I know I'm saying me, but I want the group to feel that
Yes.
way. I want the group to feel really passionate, and if I don't sense that energy, it makes me uncomfortable, frankly. But what I want surrounding me is a ton of IQ that we can then immobilize and marshal and
Sure.
activate, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of a very delicate balance for me, because my biggest watch out is taking EQ up to, fifth gear way too fast before the organization's ready to rally.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've got to temper my enthusiasm, and I would say the biggest watch out for a heavy EQ, heavy energy person
Yes.
is active listening,
Yeah.
right? And how do you slow your roll? How do you think about moments in time to say, "Hey, tell me more about that"? That's that is a phrase that was given to me 15 years ago, and I still use it to this day, from Dave
Yes.
Moran. And those that are listening from Heinz know who Dave is. And Dave is like, you've got to slow down. You've got to ask more questions. You've got to clarify. And once you've got you've got 80% of the picture, get 100,
Yeah.
and then roll, and people will follow you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yes.
I don't necessarily know if I don't know if you ever perfect the balance between those two forces, regardless of whether you're EQ, IQ, or some other strength relative to those dimensions.
Yes.
You could say you're always sharpening the saw, or other means by which you can harness the craft.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And some of that's situational as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are times where I would say the EQ, where I feel I would like to think that people would agree with this, but at least I would hope. I would hope that they feel where EQ comes out in the most genuine and most material ways is caring.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
I am a very emotive person. I will my former VP, who just retired, of internal sales, who I adored, she was with me for 8 years. She just retired, and she goes, "You are going to cry, aren't you?" And I go, "Yeah, I am. Like, I'm really proud of what the team did, or I'm really proud that this individual achieved what they didn't think was possible." And I just think that that genuine caring for individual, company, culture, the whole shoot and match is a really big delineator, as to, because at the end of the day, why is someone following you? Why is someone
Bingo.
right? Like, why is someone placing their career, which everyone has a degree of fragility associated
Yes.
with their professional journey, and how do you establish trust? How do you pull them through that system, and know that you've got their back?
Yes.
With constructs on performance, with constructs on what is realistic, with the ability to have the hard conversations. All that fun stuff can still come with a underpinning of caring, thoughtfulness, respect, and that's that I believe is where my EQ is strongest.
And yes, and I would have to agree. And
I'd like to think.
What's that?
I'd like to think, anyway.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
again, because I know you and I've seen you in action. The cool thing is I got to see you in action, but I also got to see you behind the scenes when you weren't in front of a group, or just a one-on-one conversation. And you're consistent. You're the same either way, whether it's in a group of 500 people or one person. But I agree. I think because you're a very genuine, authentic person, that caring does come out. And at the end of the day, do I want to work for the smartest person in the room, or do I want to work for someone who cares about me? I mean, if I have to choose between those two, again, in my mind, you bring both to the table. But if I had to choose, honestly, I'd rather work for someone that I know has my back and cares about me. Because,
the power of, I tell people all the time, sorry to cut you off.
No.
I tell people all the time, the currency that is most important for you to really test is advocacy. And are you given the degrees of freedom to be, again, your best self, and achieve what you think is possible, and people are knocking things down, and it's not incumbent upon them to pull you through the system entirely. That is disproportionately on you. But are they an impediment, or are they an advocate? Are they are they putting up roadblocks? Are they someone that you feel like, you know what, I know if I work hard, if I deliver, and the time is right, good things are going to happen.
Yes.
And I've been blessed with, gosh, out of my 30 plus years of professional experience, I've had some pretty funky bosses, but I had one for 12 years at Heinz that was continuous, that I adore. I've had three at McCormick that all have, different sizes, shapes, and leadership models, but there was one common thread: high trust, high advocacy.
Nice.
Right. And
yes.
And when you don't have it is when you realize just how powerful it is.
Yes.
Right. Just how powerful
you
it is.
realize and how important it is.
How important it is for your just mental health, your ability to be successful, your ability to be balanced at home. Like if you feel like you're under duress, that can take a toll.
Yeah,
that can take a real toll. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, and it's good to hear that you have those examples, both positive, and then maybe some that you're like not as big of a fan of.
Yeah.
So I know you've led a lot of teams, and I'd love to hear your comparison, and maybe this is where, because I do want to hear you talk about moving from individual contributor to leader for the first time, but maybe biggest team you've ever led, smallest team, and then compare and contrast those.
Yeah. So let's see. The first team was Ketchup.
Nice.
I was the trade marketing manager of Ketchup. It was the first time we did a national, like I own national ketchup. I mean, people are like,
kind
well,
of
how
exciting.
Yeah, and I remember my father-in-law saying, well, how hard is it to sell ketchup? And he's from Pittsburgh, so he's, it's an 85 market share. I'm like, yeah, you got a point there. But I had a team a team of two.
Oh.
Yeah,
cool.
And one I still keep in touch with, Angie. So Angie, if you're listening, or if you do listen, you know who you are, because she was my first hire.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I just remember being as nervous as probably they were, being very uncomfortable, because now I'm like, you know what, they're counting on me, and boy, did I learned a lot, and I matured a lot too. I don't think I think it took me a full decade to truly get to a place that was, I would argue, effective to very effective. Because I was so detail oriented, analytically inclined. I didn't shed the individual contributor fast enough.
Gotcha.
Because I felt my self-worth was associated with that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. So much of your value is placed in that role, and I don't think, I've always said there's two things that are really tough to get prepared for. That first role, I don't care if it's 2 people, 10 people, 20, and the first time you're managing. You're leading leaders, right? So you're a VP
that's
leading.
a transition too.
Huge, a much larger gap from my vantage point, and nothing. And I don't think much. I think you can get some practical experience in that, but it really is at that point, it's your innate skills to navigate some things. And I've watched people on board, and I love watching them go through that process. So first team was Ketchup, and again, I would say, gosh, I was 28. I mean, I had hair. It was a different time. I still needed a comb at work, and I learned the basic lessons that you would expect in that stage. I think the big move for me, I think I was right at 30. I got the director of internal sales for, at the time, condiments and sauces. So now I'm leading, 3 of me previously. So I have, folks that are very well educated, MBA and or more experienced than me. That's also a really.
'Cause you're young.
I'm
30.
young. I'm in my early 30s, maybe even 30, and that was a big pivot. Which is, okay, now I've got really bright minds who can go toe to toe with me intellectually, and how do I galvanize this team? How do I set a vision for what we want to be, in addition to what we have to deliver, right? So that practical reality of, I wasn't brought there for status quo.
Right.
I wasn't placed there to hold the line. I was placed there to take our capabilities, competencies, and ultimately our products that we delivered to the team to the next level, which we were able to achieve. And how do you determine, another valuable lesson, which frankly came later on too, is how do you determine who's on board and who's not?
Ooh. How'd you do that?
That lesson didn't come, and it came too late. Yeah, I mean, I'll take you through that. Maybe I wait on that one. And I'll give it to you. I'll give that to you. But I think the director role at Heinz is where I started to get my glide path, like that, and I started to realize just the value of working with and through others and influence, and then also setting. I had a really good series of bosses there too on how do you set the vision. And even if it's narrow, like this was, it was one of our biggest businesses, but it wasn't the full shooting match.
Right.
So I was in between individual contributor, setting the stage for this sub-department, but also had to be I had deference, to the broader strategy, both company and function.
Yeah, so you're in that middle.
I'm in that middle space. I'm not actually setting full strategy, but I'm also trying to break this team into a different place, right? So that was a lot of fun. And frankly, what I learned there is I tried to do it via listening and then ultimately translating versus us building it together, and that was a mistake. Yeah, and I would say, and again, I've seen examples where that has to happen.
Yeah.
Most notably when you're in strife, or you've got just you're under duress, or you've got a huge opportunity that is time based, and there is no time or there's limited time to enroll and enlist. You've got, okay, we've got a job to do.
We have to go this way.
We got to go. We got to go. And I need to know that you're all in. By the way, in the next hour, we're going to determine if we're all in or not. Right. So there's been instances like that. But I think that first director role, I tried to do too much of the strategy setting and not enough enrolling and enlisting. And I learned some valuable lessons there too. And then they finally worked themselves out. I would say some of the biggest learning for me in terms of enroll and enlist was when I was asked, and this was a tough assignment, I was asked to move from total U.S. consumer products accountability to, hey, Bill, we want you to run North America, which was the restaurant industry and the retail group. So I had a really strong retail group. I had, frozen. This was the biggest division at Heinz.
Yeah.
And I had two really strong directors. I had, we hired a lot of great talent. We had built that team up on multiple dimensions. That's a story for another day. So I was blessed with great leaders.
That's great. That helps a lot.
100%. And they and the first thing they said, this is when you've kind of hit pay dirt with these folks. And it was Bill and Bill. So we were the three amigos because it was the three Bills. And they came to me and they said, look, we got it. We got it. We know what you want to do. We know what you got to do. And you've got to get that. And we've got your back here.
Oh, cool.
And it was super cool. Like, it's one of those ones where that's a tear up moment for me. I'm like tearing up right now just thinking about it. And those guys would punch me in the head if they knew that was coming. But, they were remarkably gifted folks. And so that enabled me to go in, and when something has been a really valuable lesson as it relates to that silent dissenter piece is the food service business was in strife. It was by far the most successful business at Heinz. And it went through a really tumultuous 3-year window. And I was brought in there by the president to say, hey, get after it, fix it. And, I'm a outsider from the other division. These divisions knew each other, but they didn't cross-pollinate talent. They didn't, because it was a very different business model. I
was going to say, I could see how that would be very siloed because it is quite different.
It's huge. It's a huge disparity in terms of go-to-market. It's consumer product selling is I've got 10 accounts and I have the same 10 accounts at McCormick that I did at Heinz that represent about 80% of the business. So a lot of it is cultivating relationships and selling in capabilities. It's not the hunter-gatherer.
Right.
Where restaurants, there's a million of them.
Yes.
And you need hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
Right? You need folks that know how to close, how to prospect. And so those requirements for success were vastly different. Yeah. And the sales team knew that, and they would call BS on that. It's like, okay, who's this guy? So
couldn't do my job.
No. But the catalyst event to rally the team together was the fact that performance had been so rough, and this team was used to being, paid out. They were used to delivering best in class, not only for the company, but for the industry. This was a well-respected organization. Not that it lost that, but it was definitely in strife. And I was asked to fix it, right now, because it was I won't go into the details, but it was tough. And I felt, so then what you find, and this was the learning, and again, sorry for being so verbose on this
great.
one. You think, it's that change curve, right? You think you've got them, and you go down, the Change Monster is a great book. It's a very quick read.
Change Monster. I don't think I've heard of that
Yeah,
one.
Star Model and,
Yeah.
all the classic examples of change. But Change Monster suggests that the journey is not linear, which most people that have done,
makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
And that there are fits, restarts, and things of that nature that you have to be mindful of before you actually go up the curve.
Okay.
And you're going to get setbacks. You just don't really anticipate them. And the most dangerous individual in a change curve is the silent dissenter.
Yes.
Right? So they're and particularly if they're on your leadership table.
Yes.
And I encountered that several times throughout my career, but never more than that window. And I completely get it.
Sure.
Because
it makes sense as to why.
Pride.
Mm-hmm.
It had nothing to do with ego, in my opinion. It was all like, look, we have been wildly successful. Mm-hmm. I get what you're trying to do. We're going to get through this. We don't need you. Mm-hmm. And what I was seeing in the P&L first and foremost is, yeah, you do, and we got to move like tomorrow, And how do you paint that picture to get the masses, and then how do you snuff out, and really call to action those that are dissenting? And what do you do, right? Like, how do you enroll and enlist them, and how do you address that? It's probably one of the most uncomfortable series of conversations I had, because the individual, that name I won't mention, the individual that I had to discuss things with was wildly respected, by myself included, and had built up a wall that was problematic, right? So, what do you do? Okay, you address it individually first, multiple times. Try to enroll and enlist. Try to actually make them a showcase. I would say the most valuable lesson I learned there is, how do you showcase that individual as the change catalyst?
Yes. And it's interesting because a
then
lot
they're
of
in
people
role.
try to push that person as far away as they can. Don't talk to the problem children, or leave that person out of this. And I'm like, bring them in.
Bring them in. And yeah, so, but, that took some time. But boy, what a valuable lesson, because I encountered that again. And when you start to see it, you can react to it faster, right? So, and McCormick so I was asked to drive a lot of change at McCormick, which was more of a contemporization effort. The team was wildly successful, but it had 3 years of substandard performance in 2012 to 2014 before I joined. And it's like, look, we need your expertise here, and here. But I was, a guy that didn't, carry the bag, and
right.
I was the sales strategy guy, the capabilities guy. So how do I enroll and list 2/3 of my organization that's like, wait a minute, he never called on Walmart, he never called on Kroger. What the heck is he?
He's going to try to tell us how to do it.
Yeah. So, went on a learning journey there for about 90 days, and then I purposefully tapped into some wildly talented people that were really passionate, but also needed contemporization, and showcased them.
Very cool.
Showcased them and brought them into the loop. And, most made it. Most actually did a great job. Not all. But painting a vision, particularly when you're in strife of, are we really happy where we are, can be a tremendous motivator.
That's a really good way of framing it.
Right. But if you're wildly successful,
yeah,
and then trying to create a catalyst for change, that's a pretty challenging window.
Nothing's broken. Why do we need to fix this?
Exactly right. So anyway, those are some, I know we went down a series of rabbit holes, but hopefully helpful as it relates to change, and what I've been able to learn and influence. And I'm still, every situation's different, right? So I'm still learning as it relates to that.
Yeah, but so I have a couple follow-up questions to that. You were talking about showcasing.
Yeah.
Can we just go tactical real quick and just talk about some examples of how you do that, and how you get, some of these dissenters pulled in?
I think part of it's education, and part of it is knowing the venue to put them in a position, and how do you approach that individual. I'll use an example, and I don't think he'll ever listen to this. He's retired. And we
have a big audience.
I don't know. We'll see. So a gentleman by the name of Randy at McCormick for 32 years when I arrived. He ran our Publix business. He was internal sales. He was well respected, at least from what I could deduce, and I thought he was very effective. And there was a cultural setting aspect to him.
Mm.
And McCormick at that point,
he kind of had a high level of influence and following.
And there were a few. And when I walked in the door, the 3 external direct reports that I had a combined experience of 105 years at McCormick.
Oh my!
So 30 years plus at McCormick doing sales, being brought through that system. So had seen everything. I could never replicate what these 3 talented individuals had gone through. So certainly they were critical, but they also just saw a catalyst change, meaning their boss they've got a new boss. So typically that creates some motivation to be receptive.
Mm-hmm.
But the bowels of the organization is where the change occurs, right?
Yes.
And that's where ultimately it had to happen. So fortunately, those 3 gentlemen, 2 of which still work for me, were able to help me navigate that cultural onboarding, which I thought was going to be easier than it was, and I'm still learning, frankly. I think you always do.
For sure.
But this gentleman, Randy, so what we were trying to let me describe what we were trying to do. So we were building out capabilities that we actually had to fund. So we actually had to make choices within our budget to take away from X and move to Y. Revenue management, which is basically pricing analytics that had not existed before, and then really bolstering our category management team.
Gotcha.
Which I had a passion for because ultimately I was tasked with, hey, contemporize, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I said, but contemporization comes through insights, analytics, tools, capabilities. Mm-hmm. And what I quickly deduced is that this sales team was wildly successful, but in a very narrow space. They were asked to execute.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they were being asked to execute in a very narrow space, at least from my vantage point. And the other thing that I thought was criminal is they really weren't exposed to the P&L. They weren't exposed to the analytics. They really, this was a team that was thirsting, but had not been afforded that opportunity to really even understand how things were working.
Couldn't tap into their curiosity, any natural curiosity.
Right, because it was do.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean? So, and it worked. I mean, it worked for a very, very, very long time. So that's not meant to be disparaging. It just is what it is. So I'll focus in on revenue management. Revenue management ultimately is taking a look at your customer investments, your pricing strategies, and trying to maximize that for customer and for company.
Yeah.
Right. So where's that sweet spot? And when it was very apparent to me that folks had not been exposed to the P&L, I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't know that what they're doing is denigrating, the P&L.
The impact that they have.
Exactly. And when you're top line only focused, and that's how you're incented and that's how you're rewarded, that is frankly what they should be doing.
Right.
So it's not like anyone was doing anything wrong. But then we started to expose it to the leadership team. So my team was educated, but subsequently the director community really is, I think, where strategy is ultimately, culture will eat strategy for lunch. You've heard that probably repeated 4,000 times. And the cultural setting doesn't sit around my table. It actually sits a tad lower, in my opinion. And the execution and who we ultimately are accountable to are the salespeople that have to, grind it out and work with customers every single day. So I always felt like that accordion effect. And Randy, I was like, you know what? Okay, here is a guy that has tons of passion, but doesn't know. And there's a few others, but I'm using Randy as an example. And he was pissed, like pissed. He's like, Bill, I had no idea that this is what was going on.
Wow.
And I go, Randy, would you mind if I tapped into you as we launch this? And what
there's probably other Randys out there.
Oh, there were a lot, and rightfully so, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Randy may disagree, and he'll probably. Here's what I know: if Randy disagrees, he's going to reach out to you.
Okay,
good. But I had Randy speak at the sales meeting. And so I really, my sales meetings, which we haven't had a live one in a while, which I desperately miss. But how do you showcase lower to create activation with credibility?
Yes.
Versus the talking mouth.
Yes.
That is, theoretically too far removed from.
Sure. Disconnected from the day-to-day reality.
Yeah, exactly right. So now here's a guy that's fighting it out every day with his team, frustrated. Can I get him to be my flag-waving patriot?
Oh, that's awesome.
Right? And Randy took it. He said, I'm there. He was one of the first ones to grab the flag. And I'm still indebted to him for doing that because, and I had a couple others that paved the way because that first couple years at McCormick, first and foremost, I didn't meet much resistance because the team was used to high performing. So that was the wonderful gift of the 30, 40, 50 years of success that preceded, my arrival. And they were pissed off from a macro perspective of just not achieving what they felt like was appropriate. And they wanted to be more aggressive. They wanted to fix, but they weren't necessarily sure what they had to fix.
Yeah.
Right? So the fact that we could get a guy like Randy, and there's a couple other cases that, I won't belabor the point, but the power of that.
Yes.
I would have never done that at 30. It would have been about Bill.
Sure.
Right?
Well, you could have so easily walked in and said,
Yeah.
I'm the boss now,
Yeah.
and we're going to do it this way, my way, because I said so.
Yeah.
And think about how that would have gone over.
Or stage time,
Yes.
not validation time,
Yes.
not the practical realities of how do you bring that to life with a customer experience. And I've used that tactic in a genuine and thoughtful fashion,
Yes.
not in
Not
a
manipulation.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Oh, good Lord.
Because that doesn't go.
They would have me out on the street pretty quick.
Yeah.
But I've used that many times at McCormick, most notably, and I think back on other instances at Heinz, most notably, where gosh, if I had done that, had I used that approach, which again comes with maturity, vulnerability, right? Like
and humility.
Yeah.
Because if you've got too much ego to be able to kind of step to the side and showcase someone else and let someone else shine and be the example instead of, and maybe get some of the credit instead of Bill getting the credit and Bill getting the spotlight. Yeah,
and I always felt like I was a credit maker versus credit taker, but that lesson I don't think is ever fully learned until I don't even know if I'm done with that learning, but certainly I reflect back and I'm like, gosh, I was probably taking too much. I mean, I was definitely trying, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And it took a couple of missteps. It took a couple of experiments that didn't go so well, right? It took some change management efforts with, you and I have worked with some talent change management resources that are consultants.
We can give a shout out to
Jen Runkle.
Jen Runkle.
Jen Runkle. Boom, boom. She's
Runkle
worked at
Consulting.
She's fantastic. If you want to talk to Jen, I'm a very, very high on Jen, and she's worked with me at McCormick, and Mylan, of course. So. That's another gift from Mylan, right? So 11 months I've picked up Jen as well. So, but back to the point, I think, gosh, I'm in my mid 50s, and it took me, until my early 50s to figure that out.
Yeah.
And what I would hope is, through, great work like this is, can you truncate that learning curve? I didn't have that. I had great folks that were mentoring me on my behavior and my influence and the tactics around strategy and how do you layer up your thinking. But I would say influence and change management, I never went to a class, I was never classically trained.
Right.
And it came through experimentation, mistakes,
yes,
and also watching really great people execute it.
Exactly. But knowing how to do that and I agree with you. If you can truncate it, it's helpful. That's the purpose of doing this show, because I think there is a gap sometimes in truly preparing leaders and teaching them how to lead. It's a lot of, okay, you were a great individual contributor, so now you're going to be in charge of other individual contributors like you, and you know how that goes. A lot of times it's like, well, wait, so can I just still be the individual contributor but get paid more? And
right. Well,
what is my role now?
What
am I supposed to
there's nothing wrong with getting paid more, to be clear.
Exactly. I'll take the money. But there's not a lot out there. And so my goal in talking with people like you, which is why I'm excited that you're here, is to share those lessons, to say, hey, here's some things that I learned, because it's a journey, it's not a destination. So here's some things that I've learned along my leadership journey that maybe can be helpful to somebody else, especially someone who is just starting out. Maybe there's someone listening who is a leader for the first time and is like, never thought to do it.
There's and there's so many great books, but the practical experience and the practical application, right?
Do you have some favorites you want to share?
Well, I shared the one, right?
Yeah.
Like the Change Monster is great. I would say anything by Marshall Goldsmith is a good one. I don't know if you're a Marshall Goldsmith fan, but there are some publications that he's got. And then I've got a few rags like Good to Great. I love that book.
It is a good book.
And I love case studies, practical case studies.
Yeah.
The other one that is some may disagree. And I have high ADHD, so for me to read is tough. But Execution by Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan is a fantastic.
I've heard of that one. Okay.
So that's a GE reference and a
Gotcha.
Lockheed Martin reference. And it speaks. It is much more clinical on the power of execution and how are you successful in overcoming some obstacles and setting forth a vision, things of that nature.
Yeah.
It's a dense read, but it's a very good read. And if I think of more, I'll send them to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So we have too much of great conversation here to pack into one episode. This conversation will continue into a second episode. So please subscribe, come back and listen to the second part of this conversation with Bill Simon.